The sound recording begins with static, then a low rumble that builds into something impossible. 48 seconds of audio that has baffled wildlife experts for over 2 decades. When you listen to it, really listen, you hear something that should not exist. A howl that seems to come from multiple directions at once. A cry that carries harmonic overtones found in no known animal. The man who captured this recording was a professional sound engineer who had worked in forests around the world. He knew what bears sounded like. He knew cougars and wolves and coyotes. What he recorded in the Missouri Ozarks matched none of them. And he was not the first. For over a century, people living in the ancient highlands of southern Missouri, northern Arkansas, and eastern Oklahoma have reported encounters with something that defies explanation. A massive predator covered in dark, matted fur, eyes that glow in lamplight, and always that terrible howl echoing through the night. Livestock killed in ways that match no known animal, tracks that appear and vanish as if the creature walks between worlds. Witnesses who swear they will never forget what they saw, what they heard, what they felt in that moment of primal recognition. They call it the Ozark Howler, and the evidence suggests it has been here far longer than any of us. The Ozarks are old. Geologically speaking, they predate the Appalachian Mountains by hundreds of millions of years. What we see today are the worn remnants of peaks that once rivaled the Rockies in height. Time and weather have carved them into a landscape of steep ridges, hidden hollows, and limestone caves that tunnel deep into the earth. Early French explorers called the region Ozarks, possibly referring to the bending rivers or the arched appearance of the hills. By the time American settlers arrived in the early 1800s, the name had evolved into Ozarks. The native peoples who lived here before European contact left behind mounds, petroglyphs, and oral traditions that speak of spirits dwelling in the forests and mountains. The Osage, Caddo, and Quapaw tribes all had stories about creatures that inhabited the wild places. Some were protectors, others were warnings. When settlers pushed westward into the region, they brought their own folklore with them. German immigrants spoke of the Wolpertinger. Scots-Irish families told tales of black dogs and phantom beasts. These stories blended with native legends and the harsh realities of frontier life to create something uniquely Ozark. By the mid-1800s, logging camps and isolated homesteads dotted the hills. Families lived miles from their nearest neighbors, connected only by rough trails that wound through the forest. At night, the darkness was absolute. No streetlights, no distant highway glow, just the cabin, the fire, and whatever sounds came from the trees. It was during this period that the first documented accounts of the howler began to appear in local newspapers and personal journals. The creature was described consistently across different accounts. Witnesses reported an animal roughly the size of a bear, covered in dark matted fur. Its eyes glowed red or yellow in lamplight. Some said it had horns like a bull. Others claimed to see large tusks protruding from its mouth. Nearly everyone agreed on one detail. The sound it made was unlike anything else in the forest. Not a wolf howl, not a panther scream. Something deeper and more unsettling. A sound that seemed to come from multiple directions at once and left livestock terrified for days afterward. During the 1,880 seconds, a traveling preacher named Silas Treadwell kept detailed journals of his circuits through the Missouri Ozarks. In an entry from October 1881, he described staying at a homestead near the current river. The family had lost 3 hogs in as many weeks. Each animal had been partially consumed, but the wounds were strange, too large for a wolf, too clean for a bear. On his second night there, Treadwell wrote that he was woken by a cry that made his blood run cold. He described it as a howl that began low and rose to an almost mechanical wail before dropping off suddenly. The family dogs refused to leave the porch. In the morning, tracks were found near the hog pen. They resembled bear prints, but showed claw marks that extended several inches beyond the pad impressions. Treadwell's journal is housed at the Missouri State Archives. The entries are matter of fact, written in the style of a man accustomed to recording his travels without embellishment. He made no supernatural claims. He simply noted what he heard and saw, yet his description matches dozens of other accounts from the same era. Farmers and hunters across the region reported similar experiences: livestock killed in unusual ways, strange tracks, and always that terrible howl echoing through the night. By the early 1900s, the Ozark Howler had become part of local culture. Parents used it to keep children from wandering too far into the woods. Hunters swapped stories around campfires. The creature appeared in regional newspapers, usually in the form of humorous editorials or tall tales. But beneath the folklore, serious encounters continued. In 1915, a timber crew working near Branson, Missouri, claimed to have seen the creature cross a logging road at dusk. The foreman, a man named Walter Hastings, wrote to the local gazette describing a massive, cat-like animal with a dark mane and glowing eyes. The letter was published as entertainment, but Hastings reportedly never joked about what he saw. The development of the Ozarks accelerated after World War II. Highways cut through the mountains. Towns expanded. Tourism grew as people discovered the region's natural beauty. Lakes were created by damming the rivers. Cabins became vacation homes. Yet, even as civilization spread, the sightings did not stop. If anything, they increased. More people in the woods meant more opportunities for encounters, and the howler seemed unconcerned by human presence. One of the most detailed modern accounts comes from a man named Travis Whitmore, a park ranger who worked in the Mark Twain National Forest during the 1970s. Whitmore was experienced in wilderness management and familiar with the region's wildlife: bears, bobcats, coyotes, and the occasional mountain lion. He knew their calls, their tracks, their behaviors. What he encountered in the autumn of 1973 did not fit any known animal. Whitmore was conducting a survey of a remote section of forest near the 11-Point River. The area was rugged and rarely visited. He had set up camp in a small clearing beside a spring. The weather was clear, the night cool but not cold. Around midnight he was woken by a sound coming from the ridge above his camp. It started as a low rumble, almost like distant thunder. Then it rose into a howl that seemed to vibrate through the ground. His first thought was that a large animal was in pain, but the sound was too sustained, too controlled. It went on for nearly a minute before cutting off abruptly. Whitmore grabbed his flashlight and scanned the tree line. Nothing. The forest had gone completely silent. No insects, no night birds, just an oppressive quiet that made his skin crawl. He stayed awake for the rest of the night, his rifle across his lap. At first light, he climbed the ridge to investigate. Near the top, he found a depression in the leaves where something large had been lying. The undergrowth was flattened in a wide circle, and pressed into a patch of soft earth were tracks. They were unlike anything in his field guides. Roughly circular, about 8 inches across, with 5 distinct claw marks at the front. The depth of the impressions suggested an animal weighing several hundred pounds. Whitmore made plaster casts of the prints and photographed the site. When he returned to the ranger station, he showed his findings to colleagues. Most dismissed it as a bear, possibly deformed or injured. But Whitmore disagreed. The stride length was wrong. The claw marks were too pronounced. And there was the matter of the sound. He had heard bears vocalize many times. This was different. He filed a report and stored the casts, but the incident was never formally investigated. Years later, Whitmore gave an interview to a local newspaper. By then retired, he spoke more freely about his experience. He described the feeling he had that night as primal fear, not panic, but a deep instinctive recognition that he was in the presence of a predator. He also mentioned that in the weeks following the encounter, he heard rumors from locals about livestock disappearances in the area, calves taken from pens, chickens scattered. One farmer found his dog dead with massive claw wounds across its back. The 1980s and 1990s brought a new wave of interest in cryptozoology. Books and television shows explored creatures like Bigfoot and the chupacabra. The Ozark Howler gained attention outside the region. Researchers began compiling reports and interviewing witnesses. What emerged was a pattern. Sightings clustered around certain areas: remote hollows, old-growth forest, places where human activity was minimal. The creature seemed to avoid populated areas, but was not afraid of people who ventured into its territory. In 1998, a group of college students camping near Buffalo National River in Arkansas reported an encounter that left them shaken. They had been hiking for 2 days, following a trail that led deep into the backcountry. On their second night, they made camp beside a creek. The group consisted of 5 people, all experienced hikers. Around 10 in the evening, they heard movement in the brush across the creek. They assumed it was a deer or raccoon. Then the howl came. One of the students, a woman named Rebecca Fowler, later described it as the most terrifying sound she had ever heard. It started low, almost subsonic, then rose into a shrieking wail that seemed to surround them. The howl lasted for what felt like minutes, but was probably closer to 30 seconds. When it stopped, they heard heavy footsteps moving through the underbrush, not running, walking deliberately. The students retreated to their tents and spent the night huddled together, listening to the sounds of something large circling their camp. In the morning, they packed quickly and hiked out. Before leaving, they examined the area where they had heard the movement. Large sections of brush were broken and pushed aside. They found tufts of dark hair snagged on thorns, and in a patch of mud near the creek, a single massive print. Fowler took a photograph with her disposable camera. The image shows a track roughly 10 inches long with visible claw marks. The group reported the incident to park rangers, who conducted a brief search of the area but found nothing conclusive. Fowler kept the photograph and the hair samples. Years later, she had the hair analyzed by a wildlife biology lab. The results were inconclusive. The samples showed characteristics of both canine and feline hair, but did not match any known species in North America. The lab suggested contamination or degradation of the sample. Fowler believes otherwise. Not all encounters involve direct sightings. Many people report hearing the howler without ever seeing it. The sound alone is enough to leave a lasting impression. Hunters describe hearing it echo across valleys, impossible to pinpoint. Campers speak of nights when the forest goes silent, followed by that unmistakable howl that seems to come from everywhere at once. There is a quality to the sound that defies explanation. Some say it carries an emotional weight, as if the creature is communicating something beyond simple vocalization. In 2003, a sound engineer named Marcus Delacroix visited the Ozarks specifically to record wildlife. Delacroix had worked on nature documentaries and had extensive experience capturing animal sounds. He spent 2 weeks in the Mark Twain National Forest with high-quality recording equipment. On his 10th night, he got what he came for. The recording lasts 48 seconds. It begins with a low rumbling, builds into a howl that peaks at an unusually high frequency, then drops suddenly into silence. When analyzed on a spectrogram, the sound shows harmonic overtones that are rare in natural animal vocalizations. Delacroix submitted the recording to several universities for analysis. Bioacoustics experts were divided. Some suggested it was a known animal, possibly a cougar or coyote with unusual vocalization patterns. Others noted anomalies in the frequency range and duration that did not fit standard predator calls. The recording has been played at cryptozoology conferences and shared online, but no definitive identification has ever been made. Physical evidence remains scarce. Unlike Bigfoot research, which has produced numerous footprint casts and alleged hair samples, the Ozark Howler leaves little behind. The tracks that have been found are often ambiguous. Large, clawed, but not distinctive enough to rule out known animals. Hair samples degrade quickly in the humid Ozark climate, and the dense forest makes sustained observation nearly impossible. What exists is a collection of photographs, plaster casts, and recordings, none of which provide absolute proof. Some researchers have attempted systematic searches. In 2007, a team from a Missouri cryptozoology group conducted a month-long expedition in the Current River region. They set up trail cameras, recorded audio at night, and interviewed local residents. The cameras captured numerous animals, including several black bears and a possible mountain lion, but nothing resembling the howler. However, on 3 separate nights, their audio equipment picked up unusual howls. The sounds were similar to Delacroix's recording, low, prolonged, and unsettling. The team considered the expedition a partial success, but acknowledged they had not obtained definitive proof. Skeptics offer various explanations. The most common is misidentification. Black bears are known to stand on their hind legs and can appear much larger in poor lighting. They also produce a range of vocalizations that might be unfamiliar to people unaccustomed to wilderness areas. Cougars, though rare in the Ozarks, are occasionally reported. Their screams can be mistaken for something otherworldly. Coyotes hunting in packs create a cacophony of howls and yips that echo strangely in the hills, and the region's limestone caves can produce acoustic effects that distort and amplify sounds in unexpected ways. There is also the psychological factor. The Ozarks are isolated and dense. At night, without artificial light, the forest becomes disorienting. Fear and expectation can transform ordinary sounds into something monstrous. This is not to say witnesses are lying, but rather that human perception is fallible, especially in high-stress situations. A hiker alone in the dark, hearing a strange sound, may genuinely believe they have encountered something extraordinary. Yet these explanations do not account for all reports. Experienced hunters and rangers, people who have spent years in the wilderness, insist they know the difference between a bear and something else. The consistency of descriptions across decades and geographic areas is striking, and the physical evidence, while not conclusive, is difficult to dismiss entirely. Large tracks, unidentified hair, recordings that defy easy categorization. If the howler is simply misidentified wildlife, it is a remarkably persistent case of mistaken identity. Another theory suggests a surviving population of prehistoric megafauna. North America was once home to enormous predators. The American lion, larger than modern African lions. The dire wolf, with jaws capable of crushing bone. The short-faced bear, which stood over 12 feet tall on its hind legs. These creatures went extinct roughly 10,000 years ago, coinciding with the end of the last ice age and the arrival of human hunters. But extinction is rarely absolute. Pockets of relict populations can survive in isolated environments for millennia. Could something ancient have persisted in the Ozarks? The idea is not without precedent. The coelacanth, a fish thought extinct for 66 million years, was discovered alive in 1938. The mountain gorilla was unknown to Western science until 1902. New species are identified every year, often in remote areas thought to be well explored. The Ozarks, despite their proximity to major cities, contain vast tracts of inaccessible wilderness. Limestone caves honeycomb the region, some extending for miles underground. If a large predator wanted to avoid detection, this would be ideal habitat. However, the fossil record does not support the existence of a creature matching the howler's description. No known prehistoric animal had the combination of features reported by witnesses: horns, tusks, cat-like body, bear-like size. It is possible that the creature is a composite, with witnesses attributing characteristics from multiple sightings or cultural expectations. Folklore often blends fact and fiction until the two become indistinguishable. There is another, more unsettling possibility. Some researchers have noted that sightings of the Ozark Howler often coincide with other strange phenomena: UFO reports, unexplained lights, time distortions. The Ozarks have a long history of high strangeness events. In the 1970s, the town of Piedmont, Missouri, experienced a wave of UFO sightings that drew national attention. Witnesses described glowing orbs that moved silently over the forests. Around the same time, reports of the howler increased in the surrounding counties. Whether there is a connection is unclear. Paranormal researchers suggest that certain locations act as focal points for anomalous activity. They theorize that the geology or electromagnetic properties of the area create conditions that allow unusual phenomena to manifest. The Ozarks, with their ancient bedrock and extensive cave systems, might be one such place. Skeptics dismiss this as pattern-seeking and confirmation bias. Strange events happen everywhere. The human mind is adept at finding connections that do not exist. For the people who live in the Ozarks, the howler is neither a joke nor an academic curiosity. It is part of the landscape, as real as the rivers and the ridges. They do not need proof or scientific validation. They know what they have heard. They know what their grandparents told them. And they know enough to be cautious when walking the woods at night. In 2019, a hunting guide named Samuel Porter was leading a group through private land near the Roaring River. Porter had been guiding hunts for over 20 years and prided himself on his knowledge of the terrain. On the third day of the trip, the group was returning to camp at dusk. Porter was in the lead, followed by 4 clients. As they descended a steep trail, Porter heard a sound behind them. He turned to see a large dark shape moving through the trees about 50 yards uphill. It was moving parallel to the trail, keeping pace with the group. Porter signaled the others to stop. They watched as the shape continued along the ridge. It moved fluidly, almost gliding between the trees. Then it paused, turned toward them, and released a howl that Porter later described as soul-shaking. The group stood frozen. The howl lasted for several seconds, then stopped. The shape disappeared into the forest. Porter hurried the group back to camp. That night, they heard the howl again, this time from a different direction. None of the clients slept. In the morning, they packed and left. Porter has guided hunts in the area since, but he no longer takes groups on that particular trail. When asked about the incident, he is reluctant to discuss details. He will only say that there are things in the Ozarks that do not want to be understood. The connection between the howler and livestock deaths has been documented for over a century. Farm records from Newton County, Arkansas, show a pattern of unexplained animal killings dating back to the 1,890 seconds. Sheep with their throats torn out, cattle found dead in pastures with no apparent cause, pigs that vanished from locked pens overnight. The attacks were not consistent with known predators. Bears tear and crush. Wolves kill with precision bites to the neck. Mountain lions drag their prey to secluded locations. The wounds attributed to the howler showed characteristics of multiple predator types, as if the creature possessed techniques from different species. In 1923, a farmer named Horace Dunlap lost 17 chickens in a single night. His property sat in a hollow west of Mountain View, Missouri. Dunlap found the birds scattered across his yard at dawn. Most were intact but dead, their necks broken. A few had been partially consumed. The coop door was still latched from the outside. Whatever killed them had entered another way. Dunlap found large scratches on the wooden walls of the coop, gouges that went deep into the timber. He followed a trail of feathers into the woods. About 200 yards from his property, he found a clearing where the ground had been disturbed. Leaves and dirt were pushed aside in a rough circle, and in the center, partially buried, were the remains of 3 more chickens. Dunlap reported the incident to the county sheriff, but no investigation was conducted. Predator attacks were common. Farmers dealt with them as part of rural life, but Dunlap knew his predators. He had lost chickens to foxes, raccoons, and hawks. This was different. The scratches on the coop were too high and too deep. The way the birds were killed suggested something larger and more powerful, and there was the matter of the clearing in the woods. It looked like a feeding site, deliberately chosen and used multiple times. 2 weeks later, Dunlap heard the howl. He was closing up his barn at nightfall when the sound rolled down from the ridge above his property. It started low, resonating in his chest, then climbed to a pitch that made his ears ring. His horses panicked inside the barn, kicking at their stalls. His dogs cowered under the porch, whimpering. Dunlap grabbed his shotgun and stood in his yard, scanning the tree line. The howl came again, closer this time. He saw movement in the shadows at the edge of the woods. Something large and dark, shifting between the trees. He fired a warning shot into the air. The movement stopped. The forest went silent. Dunlap spent the rest of the night on his porch, watching and waiting. Nothing approached. But in the morning, he found tracks near the chicken coop. They were unlike anything he had seen before. Dunlap made a sketch of the tracks in his farm journal. The drawing shows prints roughly 9 inches across, circular with 5 distinct claw marks extending forward. The stride pattern indicated a quadrupedal gait, but the spacing was irregular, as if the creature sometimes walked and sometimes leaped. Dunlap's journal is now held by his great-granddaughter, who still lives in Newton County. She has shared the sketches with researchers, but prefers to keep the original document private. The phenomenon of livestock predation by unknown animals is not unique to the Ozarks. Similar patterns have been reported across North America. The beast of Gévaudan in 18th century France. The Gable film creature in Minnesota. The Michigan dogman. Each region has its own version of a mysterious predator that defies classification. What sets the Ozark Howler apart is the consistency of reports over time. The same descriptions appear in accounts separated by decades. The same behavioral patterns emerge. It suggests either a long-lived creature, a breeding population, or something else that cannot be easily explained. Some researchers have noted similarities between the howler and creatures from Native American mythology. The Osage tribe spoke of the Mni-Sinoa, a spirit being that dwelled in the forests and protected sacred places. It was described as having the body of a great cat, the face of a man, and a voice like rolling thunder. The Caddo had stories of the deer woman, a shapeshifter that appeared as both animal and human. These beings were not considered malevolent, but they were dangerous to those who showed disrespect to the land. When European settlers arrived, they dismissed these stories as primitive superstition, but they soon developed their own legends. The howler became part of a broader folklore tradition that included ghost lights, phantom panthers, and devil dogs. Each community had its version. In some areas, the creature was said to have glowing eyes. In others, it had massive horns or tusks. The details varied, but the core remained the same. A large, nocturnal predator that howled like nothing else in the forest. The introduction of modern technology has not brought clarity. Trail cameras, which have revolutionized wildlife monitoring, rarely capture the howler. Thousands of cameras are deployed across the Ozarks each year by hunters, researchers, and conservation groups. They photograph deer, bears, bobcats, and countless other animals. Yet clear images of the howler remain elusive. The few photographs that might show the creature are ambiguous at best. Dark shapes in the distance, blurred movement, nothing definitive. This absence of photographic evidence frustrates researchers. Trail cameras use motion sensors and infrared technology. They activate automatically when an animal passes within range. If the howler exists and is as large as witnesses claim, it should trigger cameras regularly. The fact that it does not suggests several possibilities. The creature is extremely rare, making encounters statistically unlikely. It is intelligent enough to avoid cameras, though this would require awareness of human technology, or the sightings are indeed cases of misidentification, and the howler exists only in the minds of witnesses. Yet, there are exceptions. In 2011, a trail camera in the Hercules Glades wilderness area of Missouri captured a series of images that have never been satisfactorily explained. The camera was positioned on a game trail used by deer. Over the course of 3 nights, it photographed a large animal moving through the area. The images are dark and grainy, taken with infrared flash. They show a quadrupedal creature with a thick body and what appears to be a mane or ridge of hair along its back. The eyes reflect the camera flash, appearing as bright white orbs. The animal's size is difficult to determine without reference points, but comparison with deer in other photos suggests it was substantially larger. The landowner who retrieved the camera shared the images with a wildlife biologist at Missouri State University. The biologist examined the photos and concluded they most likely showed a black bear. The body shape was consistent, and bears were known to frequent the area. However, some details did not fit. The mane-like structure was unusual for a bear. The proportions seemed off, and in one image, the creature appeared to be standing upright in a way that bears rarely do naturally. The biologist acknowledged these inconsistencies but maintained that without clearer images, a bear remained the most likely explanation. The landowner disagreed. He had seen bears on his property many times. He knew how they moved and how they appeared on trail cameras. The creature in these photos was different. He also noted that around the time the photos were taken, he heard unusual howls coming from the wilderness area, deep, prolonged sounds that echoed across the valley. His neighbors heard them too. One described it as sounding like a steam whistle mixed with an animal cry. The landowner eventually removed the trail camera from that location. He said he did not want to know what else might be out there. Encounters with the howler often share another common element, a sense of being watched. Witnesses describe feeling eyes on them before any sound or movement occurs. This primal awareness, the sensation of being observed by something unseen, is reported across cultures and continents. Psychologists attribute it to heightened survival instincts, the brain detecting subtle environmental cues that suggest danger. In the context of the Ozarks, where the forest is dense and sightlines are limited, this feeling might be especially pronounced. But witnesses insist it is more than paranoia. They describe a palpable presence, as if the air itself becomes charged. Animals react before humans do. Dogs bark at empty tree lines. Horses refuse to move forward on certain trails. Cattle cluster together, facing outward in defensive formation. These behavioral changes suggest that something is present, even if invisible to human eyes. In 2015, a wildlife photographer named Angela Moss was working on a project documenting Ozark ecosystems. She spent weeks camping in remote locations, photographing everything from wildflowers to timber rattlesnakes. Moss was comfortable alone in the wilderness. She had worked in the Amazon rainforest and the Alaskan tundra. The Ozarks seemed tame by comparison, until one evening in late September, Moss had set up camp beside a creek in the Boston Mountains of Arkansas. The weather was clear, the sunset spectacular. She spent the last hour of daylight photographing the changing light on the water. As darkness fell, she returned to her tent and began reviewing the day's photos on her laptop. Around 9 o'clock, she heard a rustling in the bushes across the creek. She assumed it was a raccoon or a possum. She turned on her headlamp and looked out. The rustling stopped. Silence. Then the feeling hit her. She was being watched. Moss turned off her headlamp and sat very still. She could hear her own heartbeat. The forest around her was completely quiet. No insects, no frogs, just oppressive silence. She reached for her flashlight and swept the beam across the creek. Nothing. She kept the light moving, scanning the trees. Then she saw them, two eyes, reflecting the light, positioned about 6 feet off the ground. They were too far apart to be a deer, too high to be a dog, and they did not blink. Moss felt fear, unlike anything she had experienced before. She kept the flashlight trained on the eyes, afraid to look away. The eyes did not move. They simply stared back, unblinking and cold. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, they disappeared, not by movement, but as if they had simply winked out. Moss spent the rest of the night in her tent, listening. Just before dawn, she heard the howl. It came from the ridge above her camp, a long, mournful sound that made her want to cry. She packed at first light and left the area. She never returned to that location. When Moss later described her experience to colleagues, most attributed it to stress or fear amplifying a normal encounter. Perhaps it was a deer, distorted by shadows and perspective. But Moss had photographed predators around the world. She had locked eyes with jaguars, wolves, and grizzly bears. She knew what it felt like to be in the presence of a predator. What she encountered in the Ozarks was different. It felt ancient, intelligent, and profoundly indifferent to her existence. Stories like Porter's are common but rarely make the news. Most witnesses prefer to remain anonymous. They do not want to be labeled as unreliable or attention-seeking. This silence creates a gap in the data. For every reported sighting, there are likely dozens that go unrecorded. The true frequency of encounters is impossible to determine. The howler's apparent territorial behavior is another aspect that intrigues researchers. Unlike roaming predators that follow prey populations, the howler seems to favor specific locations. Certain hollows and ridges have produced reports spanning multiple generations. Families who have lived in the area for decades speak of places they avoid, places where the howler is known to appear. One such location is Devil's Backbone, a narrow ridge in Taney County, Missouri. The ridge runs for several miles, dropping steeply on both sides into heavily forested valleys. Local hunters have reported strange experiences on the ridge for over 80 years. Compasses malfunction, dogs refuse to follow trails, and the howl is heard more frequently here than anywhere else in the region. In 1956, two brothers named Ray and Curtis Helm were hunting deer on Devil's Backbone. It was late November, cold and overcast. They had been walking the ridge for hours without seeing any game. Around 4 in the afternoon, as the light began to fade, they heard something moving through the trees below them. It sounded large, breaking branches as it moved. Ray assumed it was a deer and signaled his brother. They both took position, waiting for the animal to emerge into view. What appeared was not a deer. Ray described it as a massive dark shape, moving on 4 legs, but with a gait that seemed wrong. The shoulders were too high, the head too large. It passed below them at a distance of about 40 yards, moving steadily along the base of the ridge. Both brothers had their rifles raised, but neither fired. Ray later said he did not shoot because he could not identify what he was looking at. It did not match any animal he knew. Curtis said he simply froze, unable to move or speak. The creature disappeared into a thicket of cedars. The brothers waited, expecting it to emerge on the other side. It never did. After several minutes, they climbed down to investigate. The thicket was dense but not impenetrable. They found tracks in the soft earth, large, clawed, with an irregular stride pattern. The tracks led into the thicket and stopped. There were no tracks leading out. It was as if the creature had vanished. Ray and Curtis told their story to a few close friends, but largely kept silent about it. In rural communities, reputation matters. Being known as someone who sees things can damage credibility. It was not until the 1990s, when both brothers were elderly, that they spoke publicly about their experience. By then, Devil's Backbone had become known as a hotspot for howler sightings. The brothers' account added to a growing body of evidence that something unusual inhabited that ridge. Modern investigators have attempted to study Devil's Backbone systematically. In 2009, a team from the Texas Cryptid Research Group spent a week camping on the ridge. They brought thermal imaging equipment, audio recorders, and trail cameras. The goal was to document any unusual activity. The first 3 nights were uneventful. On the 4th night, their thermal camera detected something moving in the valley below their camp. The heat signature was large, consistent with an animal weighing several hundred pounds. But the shape was indistinct, and the movement pattern was unusual. It appeared to stop frequently, as if observing the camp. The team tried to approach on foot, but the terrain was too steep and treacherous in the dark. By the time they repositioned, the heat signature was gone. They reviewed the footage multiple times. The consensus was that it was probably a bear, though some aspects of the movement were atypical. The team also recorded several hours of audio. Most of it was unremarkable. Owls, coyotes, whined through the trees. But on the fifth night, they captured a sound that defied easy explanation. It was similar to other howler recordings, a low rumble building to a sustained howl. The sound lasted 37 seconds and was picked up by multiple recorders positioned at different locations. When the team analyzed the audio, they discovered something strange. The sound seemed to originate from multiple points simultaneously. It was as if the creature was in several places at once, or the topography was creating an echo effect, unlike anything they had encountered. Acoustic engineers later reviewed the recordings and suggested that the limestone caves beneath the ridge might be amplifying and distorting the sound. This would explain why the howl seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. But it did not explain the emotional response the sound provoked. Everyone on the team felt it, a deep, instinctive fear that was difficult to rationalize. One member described it as the feeling you get when you realize you are not at the top of the food chain. Another said it was like being transported back to a time when humans were prey. These reactions were consistent with reports from other witnesses. The howler's howl does not just frighten people. It triggers something primal, something buried deep in the human psyche. The involvement of cave systems in the howler mystery is worth examining. The Ozarks contain some of the most extensive karst formations in North America. Thousands of caves, some mapped and explored, others still unknown. These caves provided shelter for early humans and have yielded archaeological finds dating back thousands of years. They are also home to unique ecosystems: blind salamanders, bats, insects found nowhere else. If a large predator wanted to remain hidden, the caves would offer ideal refuge. There are accounts of people hearing the howler's cry emanating from cave entrances. In 1978, a spelunker named Dennis Horvath was exploring a cave system near Mammoth Spring, Arkansas. He was part of an experienced group conducting a survey of newly discovered passages. Deep in the cave, perhaps a mile from the entrance, the group stopped to rest. As they sat in the darkness, their helmet lamps switched off to conserve batteries, they heard a sound echoing through the passages. It was a howl, distorted by the cave acoustics, but unmistakable. The sound seemed to come from deeper within the system, from passages they had not yet explored. The group turned on their lamps and listened. The howl came again, louder this time. It reverberated off the stone walls, making it impossible to determine the direction. Horvath described it as one of the most unsettling experiences of his caving career. The group decided to retreat. As they made their way back toward the entrance, they heard the sound several more times, always seeming to follow them. When they emerged from the cave, they reported the incident to the local caving club. A return expedition was planned, but nothing unusual was found in the deeper passages. Whatever had made the sound was gone. Cave systems could explain how the howler moves across the landscape without being seen. An extensive network of underground passages would allow the creature to travel undetected over large distances. It would also explain the sudden appearances and disappearances reported by witnesses. The creature could emerge from a cave entrance, hunt or patrol an area, and retreat underground before daylight. This behavior has been documented in other animals. Cougars use caves as dens, bears hibernate in them. A large predator, adapted to subterranean life, would be extremely difficult to track. However, this theory raises questions. How would such a creature survive underground? Caves are resource-poor environments. Food is scarce. Most cave ecosystems are supported by nutrients brought in from the surface. A predator the size of the howler would require substantial prey. It would need to hunt above ground regularly, increasing the likelihood of encounters. Unless the creature has a slow metabolism and can survive on minimal food, it would need access to surface prey populations on a consistent basis. There is also the matter of reproduction. A viable population requires multiple individuals. Sightings suggest the howler is a solitary creature, but solitary predators still need to reproduce. This means there must be others. Yet reports of multiple howlers together are rare. One exception occurred in 2004 when a truck driver named Leonard Walsh was driving a remote highway in Stone County, Missouri. It was 3 a.m, and the road was empty. Walsh saw 2 large animals cross the highway in front of him, moving quickly from one side of the forest to the other. He slowed down but did not stop. In his headlights, he got a clear view of the creatures. Both were massive, dark-furred, and moved with a loping gait. They crossed the road together and disappeared into the trees. Walsh reported the sighting to local authorities, describing what he saw as large cats or bears, though he admitted neither description fit perfectly. He estimated their weight at 400 to 500 pounds each. The sighting lasted only a few seconds, but it left him shaken. He had been driving that route for years and had never seen anything like it. The fact that there were 2 suggested a social structure, or at least occasional association between individuals. This would be necessary for a breeding population, but complicates the profile of a solitary predator. What remains is the question: if the Ozark Howler exists, what is it? A misidentified animal? A surviving relic from the Pleistocene? Something else entirely? The evidence is suggestive but not conclusive. The witnesses are numerous but often anonymous. The creature, if it exists, has managed to evade scientific documentation for over a century. Perhaps that is the point. The Ozarks are a place where the old world persists, where forests still hold mysteries and the wilderness does not yield all its secrets. The howler, real or imagined, represents something primal, a reminder that we do not have all the answers, that there are still places and things beyond our understanding. The howl echoes through the hills, as it has for generations. Those who hear it are changed. They carry the memory with them, a thread of fear and wonder woven into the fabric of their lives. And on quiet nights, when the wind moves through the trees and the darkness presses close, they listen, waiting for the sound that tells them they are not alone. If you have heard the Ozark Howler, or know someone who has, we would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please consider liking and subscribing for more tales from the edges of the known world.